Welcome, weary dreamer, to the slow-spoken saga of dust, togas, and empires that took their sweet time unraveling. Tonight, as your pillow cradles your head like a Roman villa's mosaic floor, we invite you to sleepwalk through centuries of civic paperwork, amphitheaters filled with mumbling senators, and the occasional emperor who simply tried his best and failed spectacularly. Forget the dramas of Caesar or the battles of Hannibal. This is Roman history as it was meant to be experienced, soothing, steady, and stretched across yawning epics like a marble bench in the midday sun. No thrilling twists, no breathless pacing, just the slow rise and slower fall of the greatest empire ever to produce 6-hour debates about grain storage. So take a deep breath, wrap yourself in a metaphorical toga, and prepare for an odyssey so politely paced it may lull your inner centurions straight into slumber. Long before emperors argued about aqueducts and senators debated the optimal curve of a laurel wreath, Rome was mostly forest, mud, and myth. The tale begins as sleepily as any good bedtime history should, with twin brothers named Romulus and Remus. Their father may or may not have been Mars, the god of war. Their mother, Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin with extremely poor job security. These infants were abandoned by a river, and instead of dying as narrative logic might suggest, they were suckled by a she-wolf. Yes, a literal one. The kind with fur, fangs, and unexpectedly maternal instincts. Some say this she-wolf was actually a euphemism for a kindly local woman. Others say history was already drunk. A shepherd named Faustulus later found the boys, raised them with the sort of rural wisdom only possible when your backyard is all mud and destiny. And the twins grew up into strong, loud, and very opinionated young men. Their favorite hobby, found in cities. Unfortunately, found in cities isn't a great team sport. Romulus wanted things his way, and Remus was annoying about walls. So Romulus killed Remus, thus inventing Roman leadership principles. Decisive, ruthless, and highly problematic. Romulus then named the new city after himself Rome. Modest beginnings. To be sure, it had no laws, no streets, no citizens. But it had one very important thing: Romulus's ego. He populated Rome by inviting all kinds of people, refugees, exiles, and petty criminals, ensuring that the social fabric of the city was loose, loud, and occasionally stabbed. To secure wives for his city, Romulus pulled off a charming event known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, which, despite its deeply troubling title, was later spun into tales of unity and reluctant marital diplomacy. The Sabine men eventually forgave their abductors, possibly due to sheer exhaustion, and the city grew. The early kings of Rome followed. Not one of them had a 5-year economic plan. Most wore togas with confusing folds, ruled with vague authority, and created random traditions like you can't be king unless the birds agree. The monarchy survived about 244 years. That's nearly 900 royal ceremonies involving zero indoor plumbing. Then the people got tired of kings, too much crown polish, not enough justice. They threw out the monarchy and invented something called a republic, which is Latin for, we'll argue about this forever. Rome's early monarchs had all the pomp of kingship and none of the productivity. There were 7 of them, each reigning with varied degrees of confusion and fabric folding. Their job description included starting rituals nobody understood, building temples nobody finished, and inventing laws that needed frequent rewriting because they forgot how they worked. Let's meet these nap-worthy nobles. Romulus, still high on ego fumes from founding the city, ruled first. He created the Senate not to share power, but to pretend there was oversight. He also organized Rome's first army, which mostly stood around looking stern, because real battles were inconvenient and messy. His retirement was ambiguous. Some say he vanished in a thunderstorm. Others say he was assassinated mid. Historians politely nod and avoid eye contact. Numa Pompilius, the spiritual king, followed. He was basically Rome's therapist. He invented priesthoods, calendars, and ceremonies where people stared at birds for divine approval. Everything he did was slow, solemn, and astoundingly ineffective at stopping theft. Tullus Hostilius, true to his name, got hostile. He reintroduced war. Nobody was ready. Rome invaded Alba Longa, then invited its population to move in, doubling Rome's size and dramatically increasing its laundry needs. He died when lightning struck him for improperly performing a sacrifice. Rome took the hint and moved back to ceremonial peace. Ancus Marcius was a king who liked infrastructure. He built bridges in port cities. Historians agree he was productive, which is code for not terribly interesting. His reign is best remembered as a prolonged municipal planning meeting. Then came the Etruscan invasion of charisma. Kings with fancier names and questionable priorities. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the first of the Tarquins, claimed the throne via clever manipulation of the Senate and possibly creative storytelling. He built Rome's first, circus finally, entertainment. He also started draining the city's swampy areas, which would later inspire half of Roman politics. He was assassinated by people who probably didn't like drainage plans. Servius Tullius, possibly born a slave, ruled next. He reorganized society into classes based on wealth essential for deciding who got to stand closest to the emperor during festivals. He built a wall around Rome to symbolize its seriousness and dislike of surprises. His reign ended when his daughter and son-in-law pushed him down the palace steps. Family dinners were cancelled permanently. Finally, the last monarch, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. His name says it all. He ignored the Senate, oppressed the people, and treated Roman politics like a poorly attended talent show. His downfall came not through revolt, but scandal. His son, Sextus, committed a terrible crime against Luke, a noblewoman whose subsequent tragic fate triggered mass outrage. Rome said, "Enough king things," and permanently cancelled monarchy. Superbus fled. History took a collective sigh, and the Republic emerged less flashy, more after tossing out the last king with the flair of a toga-based reality show eviction. Rome didn't leap into democracite tip. The Roman Republic began around 509 BCE, and its birth sounded less like fireworks and more like a dry throat clearing in a marble corridor. The people wanted freedom. The Senate wanted meetings. Everyone compromised with bureaucracy. The heart of the Republic was the Senate, now repurposed from a king's advisory board into a grand chamber of perpetual debate. Senators, mostly elite landowners, wore togas, gestured dramatically, and spoke in Latin so tangled it could put Amphari to sleep. They passed laws, vetoed laws, rewrote laws, and created loopholes so complex that even Cicero would squint. Instead of a single ruler, Rome now had two consuls, because power sharing was the new fashionable dysfunction. These officials were elected for one-year terms, which meant just enough time to make mistakes and not enough to fix them. They commanded armies, presided over the Senate, and occasionally disagreed with each other so thoroughly. National progress required divine intervention or lunch breaks. The Republic introduced the idea of checks and balances, which mostly checked progress and balanced public patience. The patricians, Rome's upper crust, held most of the power, while the plebeians began a centuries-long quest for fairness. Spoiler, they never really got it, but they did get loud. To placate the plebeians, the Republic invented the role of tribune of the plebs, a political lightning rod elected to protect the people's interests. Tribunes could veto Senate decisions, propose laws, and become tragically popular until assassinated by confused nobles who forgot how vetoes worked. Early laws were inscribed on the 12 tables, not actual tables but stone slabs that resembled the ancient world's most boring coffee shop menu. These laws covered everything from property rights to the proper way to handle unpaid debts. The 12 tables were posted publicly, allowing everyone to realize how little they understood Latin legalese. And so Rome slogged forward, caught between idealism and incomprehensible bureaucracy. Citizens debated virtue, lawmakers debated clauses, farmers wondered if this new republic meant fewer taxes, and the shadow of aristocratic control remained as thick as the olive oil in a senator's midday salad. This chapter of Roman history didn't end with a bang, it ended with a shrug, a vote, and a motion to reconvene, because in the Republic, even indecision had a formal ceremony. As Rome expanded, so did its appetite. Not for glory, mind you, that came later, but for actual food. By the 5th century BCE, Romans realized they couldn't just live on myth and rhetoric. They needed grain, lots of it, preferably delivered on time and without too much drama. Naturally, it became the central theme of politics for the next few centuries. Enter the enormous state-managed grain supply system. Its job was to keep the people fed and the revolts at a tolerable frequency. This bureaucratic miracle involved importing grain from Sicily, North Africa, and Egypt, storing it, guarding it, and arguing about how to distribute it. The Senate loved this. Grain was political gold. Control the food, control the plebs, control the plebs, control the complaints, or at least redirect them to someone wearing fewer purple stripes. The Senate, emboldened by the increasingly complex layers of civic life, began treating itself less like a council and more like an aristocratic book club with delusions of grandeur. Senators debated everything: wheat taxes, ferry schedules, how many amphari should be allowed per family. They issued decrees like no grain hoarding during religious festivals, which somehow ended with celebratory bread riots. Meanwhile, the plebeians, they didn't have estates, marble statues, or private olive groves. What they did have was the right to complain loudly and organize secessions of the plebs, which involved marching out of the city, camping on nearby hills, and refusing to come back until the Senate gave them something, like laws, grain, or basic respect. One of the Senate's least sleep-inducing maneuvers was inventing public distributions of grain, originally to pacify angry mobs, later to win elections, and eventually to spark polite envy across the empire. These distributions turned into grand events where people waited in line, gossiped about local scandals, and wondered why the wheat smelled like foreign adventure. Throughout this chapter, Rome didn't conquer much land or invent new gods, but it did perfect the art of grain diplomacy, an approach that kept tempers low, togas clean, and the republic just barely functional. It was also during this time that senators began crafting longer speeches filled with metaphors about harvests and justice. Cicero would have wept, or applauded, or both, because Rome had entered the golden age of grain-powered governance. If Rome's republic was a cart, the patricians sat up front, steering casually, while the plebeians hung off the back, wondering if they were even passengers. These plebs weren't poor, exactly, just not elite enough to wear tunics with confusing embroidery. They worked, fought wars, paid taxes, and here's the twist, had no real say in how anything was run. So they complained, loudly, persistently. Historically, the first great move of plebeian defiance came in for 94 BCE, with the first secession of the plebs. Disgusted with endless debt and judicial neglect, the plebeians walked out of Rome and camped on a hill. They literally built their own parallel society on the Mons Sacré. No speeches, no senators, just sleeping bags, grumbling, and passive-aggressive silence. This worked. The Senate panicked too, would fill their ranks, fight their wars, and buy their overpriced olives. So they gave in and created the office of tribune of the plebs, defenders of the people with sacred powers like veto. Public sobbing and getting assassinated less frequently than expected. But did the complaints stop? Oh no. They grew eloquent. Every few decades, the plebeians launched another reform effort. The Lex Canulea allowed intermarriage between patricians and plebeians, which improved dating apps dramatically. The 12 Tables, hammered into public stone in 451 BC, gave plebs the satisfaction of seeing their ambiguous rights written down, but not necessarily respected. The Licinian section laws finally allowed a plebeian to become consul. Senators winced. History applauded politely. Later, laws gave plebeians access to priesthoods, land commissions, and vaguely meaningful rituals involving chickens. Each step of progress involved negotiations so slow, snails were hired as messengers. The Senate resisted with enthusiasm. The plebeians persisted with increasingly dramatic hill protests. It was democracy as sleep therapy, exhausting, repetitive, oddly soothing. By the time 287 BCE rolled around, the Lex Hortensia was passed, declaring that laws passed by the plebeian council were binding for all citizens. The Senate pretended to be thrilled while quietly inventing loopholes involving toga length and grain allotments. Thus ended the era of chronic complaint, not because everything was fixed, but because the plebs had finally mastered the art of legislation. They were still second-class citizens in practice, but they had a veto, a voice, and hills they could storm if needed. It was a win-ish. Rome didn't conquer the Mediterranean in a rush. It crept, shuffled, debated, drafted treaties, renegotiated them, filed the parchment, lost the parchment, then maybe annexed something. Expansion was less blitzkrieg and more spreadsheet with spears. In the early years of the Republic, Rome mostly fought defensive wars, which is Roman for "we wanted that hill first." They expanded through central Italy, charming or subduing neighbors like the Etruscans, Samnites, and Latin League. These groups either became Roman allies, half-citizens, or footnotes in speeches. Rome rarely conquered without a plan. Instead, They established colonies, not exotic ones with palm trees, but organized plots with standard Roman grid layouts, central forums, and cheerful signage reading Civitas ahead. These colonies kept Roman culture intact and gave veterans something to complain about while retiring. The Republic's favorite tool was diplomatic conquest. They'd send envoys to nearby cities, offering protection, trade, and mild submission. If the city declined, Rome sent legions. If the city agreed, Rome sent taxes. Everyone received a gift basket of laws, Latin phrases, and mild resentment. Once territories were absorbed, Rome installed magistrates, prefects, and governors officials who didn't always understand the locals but insisted on census data anyway. Every province needed Roman roads, Roman laws, Roman wine quotas. Bureaucracy bloomed faster than olive trees. Meanwhile, military campaigns were increasingly methodical. Roman generals weren't flashy, they were patient. Sieges lasted months, sometimes years. Negotiations stretched longer. Victories came dressed in formal statements and post-battle inventory reports. By the end of the 3rd century BCE, Rome controlled all of Italy and parts of nearby islands. It wasn't glamorous, but it was incredibly well documented. Every new border brought new spreadsheets. Every new citizen brought new taxes. Rome's strength wasn't brute force, it was meticulous micromanagement with spears, and the true genius. They granted partial citizenship to conquered peoples. These new Romans paid tribute, served in the military, and slowly absorbed Roman culture while wondering why all festivals involved ceremonial. But Rome didn't just grow, it organized, archived, and mildly lectured its way to greatness. Rome's slow spread across Italy eventually got it tangled in the Mediterranean's favorite rivalry, Rome versus Carthage, the ancient world's answer to passive-aggressive neighbor politics. Carthage, rich from trade and fond of shiny ships, controlled parts of Spain and North Africa. Rome, proud and increasingly territorial, stared westward and squinted suspiciously. Thus began the Punic Wars, 3 drawn-out conflicts spanning over a century, fueled by ego, elephants, and extremely detailed naval reports. First, Punic War. Neva nuisance. It all started over Sicily. Rome wanted control of it. Carthage already had some of it. What followed was a long naval war, featuring poorly built Roman ships and confused sailors learning to steer by trial and error. Rome copied a Carthaginian ship design and added a boarding bridge called a corvus, turning sea battles into awkward floating land battles. Very Roman. After 2 decades, Rome won through sheer persistence. Carthage paid a massive indemnity and quietly sieved. Second, Punic War. Hannibal's out-trekking adventure. This was the loud one. Enter Hannibal Barca, Carthage's military prodigy. He marched his army, including war, elephant from Spain across the Alps into Italy. It was one of history's most absurd logistical feats. The elephants did not enjoy it. Once in Italy, Hannibal won major battles. At Cannae, he encircled and destroyed a Roman army so thoroughly that surviving soldiers were asked to never return to Rome. Ever. Rome responded by doing what it did best, not panicking, holding elections, and slowly strangling Carthage's supply lines. Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, invaded North Africa, forcing Hannibal to come home. The decisive Battle of Zama ended Carthage's hopes, and Rome demanded even harsher reparations. Third, Punic War. The petty finale by this point. Carthage was weak, quiet, and not a threat. Rome destroyed it anyway. Senator Cato the Elder ended every speech regardless of topic with Carthage must be destroyed. Eventually, Rome agreed. They invaded, burned the city to the ground, and according to legend, salted the earth to prevent regrowth. With Carthage gone, Rome was the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean, but the wars came at a price. Thousands dead, an exhausted treasury, and veteran soldiers wandering back home with trauma, tunics, and a new appreciation for less dramatic vegetables. As Rome's borders bulged and its grain ships grew fatter, the Senate began developing an allergy to consensus. Once a unified body of elite, it morphed into a chamber of performative rhetoric, where senators treated speeches like therapy and laws, like haikus of. Meanwhile, far from the marble debate halls, Rome's generals were winning wars, gaining fame, and noticing something curious. Soldiers adored them, peasants respected them, and the Senate mostly just stalled their victories with legal red tape. This cocktail of battlefield clout and bureaucratic snubbing began to foment Rome's next crisis. Ambition outgrowing legislation. Enter a trio of political celebrity generals. Marius, Gaius Marius, champion of the plebeians, reformed the army by recruiting landless citizens, thus ensuring loyalty to generals over state. He won wars, wore Morda's sandals, and glared at aristocrats. Then he retired, unretired, got into political brawls, and held consulship 7 times. The Senate clutched its scrolls nervously. Sulla, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, aristocratic and slightly vindictive, disliked Marius's populism. He marched his army into Rome, seized control, declared himself dictator, and made a prescription list of enemies to eliminate. It was history's least subtle unsubscribe button. Pompey the Great, suave and beloved, conquered lands with alarming efficiency and minimal paperwork. He returned to Rome expecting admiration. Instead, the Senate offered delays, legal entanglements, and cold appetizers. His resentment simmered. These ambitious men weren't alone. Rome buzzed with rising stars, legislative gridlock, and rhetorical flair contests. Senators held debates so long they needed breaks for lunch and existential reconsideration. Generals returned home only to find their victories footnoted and their triumphs scheduled after minor festivals. The Republic had become a 2-act drama. Act 1. Senators quibble about grain allotments and appropriate statue sizes. Act 2. Generals expand Rome's borders, grow personal armies, and wonder if the Senate is still relevant. And in the wings, one man watched and waited, a man with charm, military genius, and relatives who hated boundaries. Julius Caesar. But for now, Rome's ego inflated gently, its laws tangled slowly, and its fate tiptoed toward thunder with all the deliberate pacing of a sleepy tortoise in embroidered sandals. Julius Caesar, Rome's most charismatic overachiever, had it all: battlefield glory, witty public speaking, and a haircut that dared senators to challenge him. Returning from his conquest of Gaul with a fan base and a swagger, Caesar faced one obstacle. The Senate had grown suspicious of his popularity at his calendar reforms. Rather than retire gracefully and write memoirs about river crossings, Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army on unforgivable whoops to Roman law. Civil war erupted like spilled wine at an aristocratic dinner party. Caesar defeated Pompey, hugged Cleopatra, and returned to Rome to fix the Republic. With himself as the fix, the reform created the Julian calendar, which made February sadder but more efficient, expanded the Senate with loyalists, diluting opposition like weak soup, passed laws to help the poor, stabilize grain prices, and accidentally make Rome feel like a monarchy with better lighting. The vibe shift. Not everyone loved Caesar's reforms. Senators mumbled about tyranny. Poets grew edgy, and Brutus, Caesar's colleague, friend, and certified Shakespearean foreshadowing started brooding. It all culminated on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Caesar walked into the Senate, ignored a prophetic warning, and was stabbed 23 times by senators with emotional baggage and poor conflict resolution skills. Famous last-dish words. Caesar may or may not have said E2, brute, Latin for seriously. You too, dude. Scholars debate its authenticity, but dramatists agreed it was too juicy to omit. Aftermath. Rome didn't rejoice it. Panicked. Power vacuum slurped the Republic's stability like leftover lentil soup. The assassins expected applause. They got riots. The citizens mourned. Mark Antony gave a spicy eulogy, and somewhere in the wings, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, casually started plotting his own rise. Thus ended the Republic's last gasp of democracy. Flanked by drama and daggers, the empire stirred from its cradle. When Julius Caesar's will was read, Rome was stunned to discover his adopted heir was not a seasoned statesman, nor a battle-hardened general, but a 19-year-old with good posture and a talent for political networking. Gaius Octavius, soon to be Augustus. His asset, Caesar's name, Caesar's money, Caesar's enemies, and, most importantly, a calming aura that whispered, "I'm not here to destroy the Republic. I'm just going to quietly replace it." Step 1. Form a mildly aggressive trio. Octavian teamed up with Mark, Antony, and Lepida to form the Second Triumph. Together, they hunted Caesar's assassins, restructured power, and occasionally remembered to include Lepidus in group texts. Step 2. Say goodbye to Brutus and Cassius. Brutus and Cassius were tracked down and defeated at the Battle of Philippi. They both dramatically chose suicide over defeat, thus ending the Senate's attempt to reboot democracy with dramatic stabbing. Step 3. Break up the band. The triumvirate soon turned awkward. Lepidus was politely exiled for trying to matter, and Octavian and Antony began eyeing each other like two lions circling one throne. Antony, meanwhile, had settled down with Cleopatra in Egypt, hosted decadent feasts, wore eye, and declared Caesarion as heir. Octavian didn't appreciate the aesthetic or the competition. Step 4. PR warfare and naval combat. Octavian launched an epic smear campaign, framing Antony as a puppet of Egypt, a traitor to Roman values, and someone who smelled faintly of imported lavender. War was declared. At the Battle of Actium, Octavian's navy crushed Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. The couple fled, hosted one final dinner party, and then ended things with matching suicides, perhaps history's most elegantly tragic exit. Octavian becomes Augustus, with rivals gone and Rome weary of civil war. Octavian returned home not as a conqueror but a restorer of tradition. In 27 BCE, the Senate awarded him the title Augustus, meaning majestic one, which is Latin for please don't murder us. And thus, the empire begins. Augustus ruled with calm authority, sly reforms, and unmatched branding. The Republic was never officially declared dead, just conveniently paused. Roads were built, grain shipped reliably, temples renovated, and poets paid to write flattering odes. Rome hadn't lost democracy. It had rebranded it under one man with good taste in marble. After Augustus came Tiberius, a cranky recluse with trust issues and a scenic villa of paranoia. But the real fever dream began with Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus Better, known as Caligula, which means little boot, a nickname from his childhood in the military camps. His boots were tiny, his ego galactic. Initial vibes promising. When Caligula took the throne in 37 CE, Rome rejoiced. Young, charming, and grandson of the adored Germanicus, he was seen as the golden boy. For 6 months, he ruled with fairness, generosity, and public affection. Then he got very sick, and when he recovered, Rome realized the illness may have politely rearranged a few wires. The unhinged era begins. Caligula didn't simply rule, he performed. With increasingly extravagant behavior, he declared himself a living god, ordering temples built in his honor and insisting people worship him while maintaining eye contact. Held feasts for statues, where marble guests were served delicacies, while Rome's poor ate leftover metaphors. Threatened to make his horse, incitatus, a console to restore dignity to politics. The horse had a marble stable, ivory manger, and likely better job security than most senators. Public works or personal whims. Caligula initiated lavish construction projects, including bridges for personal strolls and ships that doubled as floating pleasure palaces. Rome's budget grew confused. Senators wept into their scrolls. He also introduced new taxes, including ones for suing someone, entering a city, or simply existing while being fabulous. Relations with the Senate. Unfantastic. Caligula treated the Senate like a badly cast drama club. He publicly mocked senators, removed dignitaries for frowning too long, and occasionally threatened mass execution. Fear reigned. Laughter echoed awkwardly. Rome blinked rapidly. The end. Curtain falls at 28 Knives in 41 C. After nearly 4 years of theatrical tyranny, a conspiracy of guards and senators stabbed Caligula in a corridor. He died mid-sentence, allegedly dictating a decree about Jupiter's fashion sense. Rome exhaled. Historians argued, and in the next room, Claudius Caligula's stammering uncle quietly hid behind a curtain, waiting for his accidental promotion. Hidden behind a velvet curtain during Caligula's stabbing spree, Claudius was dragged into power like a substitute teacher mistaken for the principal. Scholars scoffed, senators winced, but Rome, exhausted from chaos, gave him a chance, and he ruled surprisingly well. The vibe, nervously competent Claudius had a limp, a stammer, and a mind sharp as a senator's gossip. He devoured history, wrote treatises, and governed with awkward sincerity. Underneath the toga, an introvert with empire-sized responsibilities, imperial achievements, conquered Britain, because maps looked better with extra land, improved Rome's infrastructure, aqueducts, harbors, and bureaucracy all got glow, expanded citizenship, made legal reforms, and even played judge. Rome didn't just survive, Claudius it grew. The empire flourished under his watchful, slightly twitchy gaze. Personal life. A mushroom-flavored tragedy. Claudius had several wives, each more dramatic than the last. His final choice, Agrippina, the younger, niece of Caligula, mother of Nero, and known enthusiast of political murder and passive-aggressive dinner parties. Agrippina wanted her son Nero to rule. Claudius had another heir. Solution: mushrooms. In 54 CE, Claudius did allegedly poisoned via his favorite dish. Historians argue, was it mushrooms? Was it a feather dipped in poison? Was it a mushroom and a feather with side commentary? Either way, Nero was crowned. Rome blinked again. The emperor performs, while the empire PERISHES ... dramatically. Adopted son of Claudius and freshly minted emperor at 16, was Rome's most theatrical ruler, equal parts playwright, pyromaniac, and misunderstood performance artist. The opening act, promising, almost charming, governed under the guidance of wise advisors Seneca and Burr, lowered taxes, sponsored public games, and even banned blood sport for a bit. Rome thought, maybe the boy's all right. Then he discovered poetry, and lyres, and experimental architecture, and suddenly, governing was just an opening act. The Great Fire of Rome, 64 CE. One night, flames engulfed the city. The blaze lasted 6 days, leveling neighborhoods and sacred temples. Nero's response: opened his palace gardens to shelter the homeless, declared urban renewal and built Domus Aurea, golden pleasure palace with waterfalls and rotating dining rooms allegedly. Performed dramatic verse in costume while watching the city burn. Historians disagree. Some say he wasn't even in Rome. Others whisper he started the fire for architectural feng shui. Either way, public opinion curled like smoke. Blame game and persecution begins to deflect suspicion. Nero pointed fingers at an obscure religious group, the Christians, accusing them of arson. They were tortured, crucified, and set ablaze to light Nero's evening strolls. Rome's citizens grew unsettled. Empathy evaporated. Artistic ego versus political reality. Nero fancied himself a singer, actor, and Olympic athlete. He forced senators to attend his performances. Some fainted. Others pretended to die to escape. He competed in Greek games and always won, even in categories he invented. Meanwhile, rebellions brewed. Judea resisted Roman control. Britain revolted under Queen Boudica. Governors rolled their eyes. Latin, the final scene. A solo exit in 68 CE. The Senate finally declared Nero a public enemy. He fled, scribbled poetry, considered escape theatrics, and eventually chose suicide. His last words: "What an artist dies in me." Rome sighed, rebuilt, and braced itself for the coming chaos. The empire entered a turbulent phase, a game of imperial musical chairs known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Rome gets 4 emperors in 1 year. None come with a return policy. After Nero's dramatic demise, the Senate blinked and hastily crowned Galba, a crusty old general with all the charisma of expired olives. Rome hoped for stability. Instead, Galba refused to pay his soldiers, executed allies, and strutted like a man who'd mistaken emperor for grumpy librarian. His reign lasted 7 months. Next slide. Otho, unamused by Galba's stinginess, a group of troops stabbed him in the street and cheered Otho, a stylish former governor with good hair and better instincts. Otho lasted 3 months. What? Because Vitellius, another general, was marching toward Rome with an army and a gut full of ambition. Otho, realizing bloodshed was inevitable, wrote a farewell note, gave his staff a tip, and took his own life to spare Rome another round of civil war. Historians sighed in surprised respect. Vitellius, feast first, rule later. Vitellius entered Rome like a banquet guest who'd mistaken ruling for gluttony. He held lavish dinners while the treasury paraded his pet chefs like imperial philosophers, ignored revolts like they were background music. Meanwhile, in the east, another general, Vespasian, a practical man with mud on his sandals and no patience for chaos, was gaining support. His legions marched on Rome with quiet resolve. Vitellius's exit, not subtle. Cornered by Vespasian's forces, Vitellius tried hiding in the palace, then dressed as a servant, then gave up. He was dragged through the streets and executed dramatically. Rome grumbled. Vespasian entered the city like a tired dad, cleaning up a party that got wildly out of hand. Finally, Vespasian, emperor and builder of order, restored discipline to the army, repaired finances, started construction of the Colosseum because nothing says we're back like staged combat in marble arenas. Rome exhaled. The empire had nearly imploded from ego fatigue, but Vespasian grounded it with practicality, dad jokes, and solid stone architecture. Glory and ash shared the same spotlight. After Vespasian's steady reign, his son Titus inherited the imperial seat in 79 CE, bringing charm, diplomacy, and a face that whispered, "I'm here to restore the empire's reputation," with minimal screaming. The grandeur, opening the Colosseum. Titus celebrated the completion of the Colosseum, Rome's glorious amphitheater that blended violence with architectural elegance. Gladiators clashed, exotic beasts fought, and the audience cheered while quietly avoiding philosophical reflections on mortality. Naval battles were recreated with flooded floors because no empire builds without turning it into a splash zone. Titus became the people's emperor. Bread and circuses flourished. The crowds adored him. Nature interrupts. Vesuvius erupts only months into his reign. Mount Vesuvius exploded in August 79 CE, burying Pompeii and Herculaneum in volcanic ash. The cities vanished beneath pyroclastic fury. Sky turned black. Survivors fled. Statues melted. Eyewitness Pliny the Younger described the scene in chilling detail. Ash rains, chaos, and philosophical contemplation. Titus responded with swift relief, sent aid, rebuilt efforts, and public mourning. Refused to exploit the tragedy for self-glory, earning empathy instead of applause. Rome saw in him not just an emperor, but a human beneath the laurel wreath. The bad encore. A plague arrives. As if volcanic destruction wasn't enough, a brutal plague swept through Rome. Titus coordinated responses and cared for victims. Historians note he wept openly at public funerals. Titus's curtain call just 2 years into his reign. Titus died possibly of illness or political encouragement. His last words, "I have only one regret." No historian knows what it was. Speculations include not ruling longer, not dodging mushrooms, not adding a retractable roof to the Colosseum. Regardless, Titus left behind a legacy of compassion, dignity, and a flair for dramatic symmetry. Triumph at dawn, ash by dusk. The empire walks on marble eggshells. Domitian, younger son of Vespasian and brother of Titus, took the throne in 81 CE with the confidence of a man who already built his victory statue. Rome had hoped for another wise emperor. What it got was an autocrat who ruled like Jupiter during a midlife crisis. The divine branding campaign. Domitian renamed himself Dominus, which historians describe as bold, and senators as slightly murdery, mandated gold statues of himself in public spaces. Eyewitnesses claim the marble ones felt judged, held daily audiences of paranoia, where courtiers learned to speak only in compliments or risk casual execution. Infrastructure in order. Despite the theatrics, Domitian improved Rome in curious ways, rebuilt areas damaged by fire, strengthened frontier defenses along the Danube and Rhine, reformed currency and boosted agriculture. Rome thrived while nervously glancing over its shoulder. Senate relations, a polite Cold War. Domitian distrusted the Senate like a cat distrusts but he avoided their advice, executed critics, and read philosophy with a dagger nearby. Senators responded by hosting passive-aggressive dinners and writing edgy poems with hidden metaphors about tyrants and tragically misunderstood vegetables. The fear economy. Domitian's reign became a game of imperial roulette. He invented charges against nobles, confiscated wealth from alleged conspirators, paraded as a moral reformer, while tossing gladiator parties and exotic beast hunts. Even his family tiptoed around him. His wife may have plotted against him. His niece wrote oddly specific lullabies, and palace servants memorized escape routes. The assassination. Curtain falls in 96 CE. A conspiracy of court officials stabbed Domitian in his private chambers. Legend says he was checking his appearance in a mirror, possibly fixing his eyebrows, possibly preparing to declare thunder illegal. The Senate declared damnatio memoria, condemnation of memory, scrubbing Domitian's name from monuments and pretending he was an unfortunate typo in Rome. His historical manuscript. Rome sighs in relief and discovers the magic of wise succession. After the thunderstorm of Domitian's reign, The Senate carefully selected an elderly statesman with the gentle aura of someone who referees philosophical debates at garden parties, crowned in 96 CE. He was more restoration project than revolution. The mood, repair, and reassurance. Nerva calmed Rome's nerves like chamomile tea for the Constitution, released political prisoners, restored property seized by Domitian's paranoia, declared he was emperor with the Senate, not over it causing collective weeping in marble hallways. Rome didn't dance in the streets, but it definitely challenges and wisdom. Nerva's reign faced tension. The military distrusted his peaceful vibe. Revolts stirred, demanding a stronger figure. So Nerva did the most brilliant, humble thing imaginable. He adopted Trajan, a respected general, fearless strategist, and all-round empire MVP. This was the first time a Roman emperor chose a successor based on merit, not bloodline. The Senate blinked. Historians cheered. It was the start of the 5 good emperors era. Legacy in a nutshell. Reigned just over a year. Stabilized power without violence. He established the idea that emperors could be made, not born. And then, gracefully, like a statesman slipping into the footnotes of greatness, Nerva passed the baton. His laurel wreath to Trajan. Bricks, battles, and borders pushed to the max. Enter Trajan, the emperor handpicked by Nerva, a career soldier with eyebrows like aqueduct arches and a strategic mind that treated maps like challenge puzzles. Rome in 98 CE was stable, but Trajan didn't settle for stability. He wanted expansion, legacy, giant shopping malls made of marble, military campaigns, glory in the east. Launched epic wars against the Dacians, who had gold mines and fantastic mountaintop views. Built a bridge across the Danube so massive it made invading look poetic. After 2 campaigns, annexed Dacia and celebrated with a triumphal column covered in spiral carvings that tell the entire war like a stone graphic novel. Trajan didn't just win, he documented, paraded, and immortalized his victories in Latin captions. Biggest empire yet. Then came campaigns against Parthia in the east, captured Armenia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Babylonia, reached the Persian Gulf and probably asked, "Can I get an empire loyalty card?" Under Trajan, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Scotland to the Persian sands. Geographers needed bigger scrolls. Public works, build, baby, build, created Trajan's Forum, a dazzling complex of libraries, courts, and open plazas for dramatic toga flutters. Funded roads, aqueducts, markets, and housing across the provinces. Introduced the Alimenta program, public welfare for orphans and poor children, making him a benevolent builder as well. Trajan understood. Empires need mortars just as much as military. The final march in 117 CE, while returning from campaign, Trajan fell ill. He died in Cilicia, far from Rome. His ashes were placed in the base of his column, a rare honor for an emperor who did conquered by sword and secured by stone. Rome mourned and marveled. Trajan was immortalized not just in borders, but in foundations. The emperor rethinks expansion, embraces architecture, and reads Plato at dinner. Hadrian, cousin of Trajan and self-declared master of maps, took the throne in 117 CE with dreams, not of conquests but of consolidation. Rome had stretched to its limits, and Hadrian politely whispered, "Maybe let's not invade everything. Beard first, boundaries second." Hadrian grew a Greek-style beard, breaking from clean-shaven Roman tradition. It symbolized intellect, maturity, and possibly an hilarity to razors. He loved all things Hellenistic Greek culture, art, philosophy, and well-proportioned columns. Rethinking empire rather than chase distant horizons, Hadrian abandoned overextended territories in Mesopotamia, strengthened borders with fortifications and traveled extensively not for war, but for inspection and connection. Think Emperor as tourist with political agenda. His reign was GP's meets stoicism. He wandered, listened, rebuilt, and puzzled over power like a thoughtful sculptor shaping marble. Hadrian's Wall. Britain gets a border. In northern Britannia, he built the iconic Hadrian's Wall, spanning 73 miles, dotted with forts and designed to keep out unruly tribes and mark Rome's northern limit. It still stands aging gracefully, like an ancient Instagram filter on a cloudy field. Romans called it boundary. Locals called it you shall not pass. Art, architecture, and commissioned the stunning Pantheon, rebuilt that dome still humbles architect, promoted cultural patronage, with statues, temples, and public buildings aplenty, deeply mourned the death of his young companion, Antinous, deifying him, and founding cities in his honor. Grief sculpted into geography. Hadrian ruled with a tender edge, blending power with introspection. He believed in governing through presence, not proclamation. Curtain call. Hadrian fell ill late in life and died in 138 CE. His body was placed in a mausoleum on the banks of the Tiber Castal, a monument to thoughtful leadership and strategic restraint. Rome had witnessed emperors who stabbed, sung, and stomped across continents. Hadrian, he stood still, then built a wall to remind everyone where the limits ought to be. When peace, paperwork, and public decency ruled the empire, after Hadrian's introspective wall building and globe, the imperial baton passed to Antoninus Pius in 138. CIA man, whose name sounds like a particularly well-behaved philosopher, and whose reign was basically a sponsored ad for stability. The personality vibe, calm/conservative, and utterly scandalous, rarely left Italy, preferring ruling from Rome with scrolls rather than spears. Treated laws like sacred poems and governance like high tea with civics. Antoninus wasn't flashy, but he was remarkably effective. The empire didn't expand under him, but it didn't need to. He focused on preserving, refining, and tending Rome like a careful gardener pruning a philosophical bonsai. Domestic wins. Improved the legal system with fairness and consistency. Avoided war by sending envoys, gifts, and very persuasive letters. Offered tax relief and built public works, including aqueducts, roads, and thoughtful statues. He reigned during a golden age, a time when being Roman felt stable, proud, and refreshingly crisis-free doesn't mean legacy-free. Antoninus Pius' reign lasted 23 years, a record of tranquil imperial adulthood. Earned him rare praise from both Senate and historians. Was so smooth that people joked future emperors could use him as a how-to manual. And in his final great act of wisdom, he adopted two successors, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, Lucius Verus, the stylish. Rome was heading into another chapter, one of stoic philosophy, military trials, and emotional footnotes written in Latin. As the stars flicker above old aqueducts and dusty scrolls curl unread in silent libraries, the Roman Empire nestles into the folds of time. The marble once shouted, now whispers. The legions rest. The emperors, gods, poets, and bureaucrats all dreamed quietly beneath the layers of history. The roads stretch endlessly into the dark, cobbled with memories, victories, and very opinionated statues. Grain ships drift across moonlit seas. Senate benches remain warm with ghostly debates about policies no one remembers. So, sleep now, beneath vaulted Roman dreams. Let the columns fade. Let the togas droop. Let Latin lull you into that soft velvet hush where empires become lullabies, and history, a whisper tucked under your pillow.